The Good Party's Brett Herron has written a piece this week saying that the season for mayoral musical chairs, regardless of the consequences for delivery of basic services, will continue until rules are put in place to regulate the establishment of stable coalitions. The political instability in Gauteng metros such as Johannesburg and Tshwane has been cited an example of the urgent need to fix coalition politics in the country. Let's speak now to Brett Herron, who's joining us, I believe, from Cape Town as always. Brett, good to have you on Newzroom Afrika. So you've written in this News 24 piece about political manipulation of coalitions in Gauteng metros. Expand on how that's played out and who's responsible.
Well, I think, good afternoon. I think what we've seen in the last 10 days in Tshwane, and what we saw previously in the city of Johannesburg, shows that all parties are responsible. All those parties that have been involved in these coalition agreements, the previous ones and the new coalitions, because what we've really seen is the opportunity to grab power being the motivation or the reason for doing so. And there's very little thought as to whether the grabbing of power is in the interest of the residents of that city and a stable government. And so sometimes I think if we have mature politicians in the room and if we had mature politics, when an opportunity presents itself to grab power or to become government, sometimes the wisest thing to do is not to accept that and to allow for stability. And what we've just witnessed in Tshwane is just disgraceful, really, in terms of taking the opportunity to grab power for the sake of power, without being fully prepared, without really understanding who's going to be occupying executive positions and whether they're qualified to do so.
And you are saying part of better regulation would, for example, having the Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs Department stepping in at a regulatory level, but to what extent? What would need to be in the formalized regulation of coalitions to better manage the situation, especially in the interest of communities who've now, in some areas, found themselves with 3 or 4 mayors in the space of 2 years?
I think there are lessons that we can take from other parts of the world where they've had coalition politics for a long time. And we must remember that our constitution was designed in a way with this proportional representation system for multi-party governments to be formed. So I think there was some foresight that in a diverse, multi-dimensional country, that we could end up in a position where different constituencies were represented and there was no outright majority. So if you look towards other countries and what they've done, there are a couple of things that I've written in the piece that the Minister of Culture could regulate through some regulations. And that includes, first of all, allowing for more time for governments to be formed. Both national, provincial and local governments need to be established, or you need to elect a president and a mayor within 14 days of the election results being declared. Now, when there's no outright majority, that doesn't give much time for parties to find each other and to agree on what the governing coalition outcomes will be. So what is the intent? What is our purpose of getting together and governing this city or this province or maybe in the future this country? And how do we see doing it together? 14 days is a very short period of time. So I have proposed that we look at other systems where there's a fixed date for an election and where the new government's term of office commences 1 or 2 months after the election has been declared. So that's one angle or one option. I recently participated in a multi-party democracy tour to Denmark. Denmark has had coalition government since 1903, and there they don't allow for a mayor to be removed through a motion of no confidence. Once a mayor is elected, that mayor is elected for the full term of office unless there's serious misconduct which results in an impeachment. So that would prevent us having these musical chair mayors when there's an opportunity to bring a motion of no confidence and it's brought and a new mayor is elected every few weeks as we're seeing currently. So I think that, those two interventions would go a long way towards stabilizing our politics. Okay. There's another consideration, and that is that the party that receives the most votes and thus the most seats should have the first opportunity to try and form a coalition government.
So you mentioned something else then about purpose, right? And would you agree, I wonder, that another fundamental flaw of many of the coalitions, especially in a place such as Gauteng in recent times, has been that they're based on the idea that my enemy's enemy is my friend, but that is not sustainable for long-term governance?
Absolutely. I think that's exactly what we're seeing. We're seeing parties coalition to form a government simply because they have a common enemy at the moment. But as you've seen in Tshwane, the common enemy doesn't last very long, with the switching of cope to the other side, so to speak. And even some councillors within the two larger parties in that coalition, in the DA and Action SA, being under suspicion of having switched sides and voted for the other side. So it's not a sustainable reason to form a coalition government when it's based simply on trying to keep another party out. And I myself have been in a coalition like that when in the 2006 to 2011 term of office in the city of Cape Town, the idea and the DA had formed a coalition government, and really that led to a merger of those two parties. But ultimately, we discovered that there wasn't a lot of common values between us.
Mm-hmm. The other complication that's emerged with coalition politics is that leaders at local level basically have to surrender the power to negotiate and finalize the terms to national federal structures. And they say that that does not always, even when they speak off the record, they say it doesn't necessarily reflect the dynamics at city level. Should that change?
It would be really a sign of mature politics if we could change, and it did change to that, where local dynamics were really and local leaders, those who were elected in those councils, were able to decide who was best suited for their constituencies' mandate and outcomes. The problem and why this does happen is because we have a very immature political system, and we have very immature political leaders who like to weaponize who you are coalescing with or coalitioning with and who you're talking to. So, I mean, you're seeing within these coalitions criticism from one party against the other. This party will coalition with the ANC, and that one will coalition with the EFF. And so they weaponize who you're talking to or who you are willing to talk to for some short-term political gain. And so in order to get to the point where you have local leaders making those decisions or making those involved in those negotiations, we're not going to get there for as long as you, as a party leadership, want to weaponize who people are talking to.
Where does the confusion around the actual relationship between the political parties leave the voter, i.e. political parties who on one occasion can't stand each other and vow to never collaborate, right? And then there are negotiations where now they're working together in a coalition, or they agree to work together and then one says, well, we don't trust these other guys fully, therefore this is why this agreement cannot work.
Yeah, I mean, that is what, to some extent, what we're seeing, and it is going to be playing out in a much grander scale if we don't get our act together by 2024, where some provinces may change governments, or we may have an outcome of the 2024 elections where there's no majority party in the National Assembly. So this is why it's so important that we find common purpose before we find a government. Because parties can agree that, for example, must be a basic income or better social security system, and they can come from two parties who are complete opponents in every other respect. So if you can find agreement around issues that you will prioritize in the delivery, and you have a mandate from your constituency, the people who voted for you, around those issues, then there shouldn't be the focus should be on what the common delivery outcomes are. And many parties have the same delivery outcomes, so that's a good starting point. And you have to get the egos out of the room so that we can govern together to deliver on those common outcomes.
Just on egos then, do you think the egos in Parliament would allow national legislation to better govern coalitions, or do the current quote-unquote casual arrangements work better?
Well, I mean, I've seen that the new Minister for Cooperative Governance has indicated that she wishes to introduce some measures to stabilize these coalitions. So that's a good sign. And whether we can get that done, if she does it as regulations, I think she can get it done for local government within what's remaining of this term of office at National Parliament. But probably we can't get much done for the next election at a national and provincial level. So I think there is a realization that coalitions are part of our future. The ANC, as I understand it, are working out scenario planning for what if they do fall below 50%, how will they govern in the future. So there is a maturing, I think, in some quarters around understanding that we need some regulation in place. And the Minister of Cogs has signaled that she wishes to put those regulations in place. And so I hope that happens. I think there are enough people who realize that what is happening in these big metros, Johannesburg, Tshwane, what happened in Nelson Mandela Bay, is not very encouraging to voters, especially those parties who wish to bring the ANC below 50%. Their conduct in these coalitions is not helping that cause at all, because what they're presenting to the voter is something completely unstable and unsustainable, and turning the voter off the idea that there should be an outright majority.
All right. Brett Herron, good to have your time. Thank you so much for being with us today.